Hi, my name is Kirk Hamilton, your host of the Staying Healthy Today show. This is a show where I bring you key experts in the fields of nutrition, prevention, integrative, and lifestyle medicine, or I talk about a particular topic. And tonight is going to be that. And today's topic is the gift of COVID, reassessing the whole vaccine industrial complex. Now, what does that all mean? Well, during COVID, one of the great things that have happened is it awakened many people and health professionals into thinking and looking at the healthcare system differently. So, for example, treating early COVID. Many physicians from either side of the political perspective were just good physicians, brilliant at institutions who wanted to find out how to keep people out of hospitals because that's where people died and how to treat COVID early, even though the government gave us no guidance whatsoever except for vaccines and things like remdesivir and such. So they came up with protocols and multiple drugs, multiple nutrients, monoclonal antibodies, and the goal was to keep people out of hospitals. And they did such. And then the vaccines came, and the same group of people started questioning the vaccines because they're really gene therapy. It's not a true vaccine that prevents disease. It was thrown in the middle of a pandemic, and it causes your body to make the spike protein. The spike protein is the toxic spike on top of the ball of the virus, but that spike protein was man-made and probably altered to be more lethal, but it causes clotting, inflammation. Some people believe turbo cancers, um, rapid neurologic progression of certain diseases, fertility, etc. So the reason I say the gift is because COVID awoke many different physicians from different perspectives to look at the whole industry of vaccines, not just from the COVID vaccine, but now these same physicians who got all their children vaccinated, who got themselves vaccinated every year to be in the hospital, started questioning regular vaccines. Um, and as they dug deeper into there, I know many of these physicians who treated early COVID from different political persuasions would now not give their children the childhood vaccines or very minimally, and they won't take vaccines or very minimally themselves. And so this has evolved this whole movement, with Robert F. Kennedy getting into the head of HHS, um, has brought people along to not only just try and stop the COVID vaccine, but really reevaluate um, what vaccines do in general and why do we give them and are they really preventive and beneficial. And so that leads into this Substack because it ended up being, I don't know what it was, but there's like 6 or 7 components of really remarkable things about the whole vaccine issue that have come up in the last month or two. And I just, from President Trump on December, 5th, saying, there should be a nationwide vaccine review. And why are we giving more vaccines than other industrialized countries? And then uh, the group called ACIP, which evaluates vaccines, a group of professionals. There's a new crew in there, and they said, we should really stop requiring the hepatitis B vaccine for all infants at birth. I mean, it seems so logical. Why would you give a vaccine for something that's, you know, a drug-related illness in the sense of, you have to be a drug user to be of concern, or your parent would be. But to give a little baby vaccine at birth. So anyway, that got, checked and let go of, and President Trump was very supportive of that. We've had the Henry Ford unpublished hospital study has been re-reviewed, and this was a study in 2020 of the Henry Ford health system of over 18,000 individuals from I think it's 0 to 18 years of age, and some 16,000, 15,000, 16,000 were vaccinated with all their with their vaccinations, and approximately 1,900, I believe, weren't vaccinated. So there was a study done, and it was done by a very elite team. Dr. Zervos from the Henry Ford Healthcare System, an infectious disease specialist, was the lead investigator, and they found a remarkable increase in chronic diseases in those children and young adults that were vaccinated compared to those who weren't vaccinated. It was a dramatic difference in multiple chronic diseases, and a lot of the percentages are put in this review that I've done. And so, what happened there was is that was they didn't publish it. So uh, that was reanalyzed by a peer review group, and in this issue, you're going to see that review there, and it's excellent. And you just see the percentages. It's just black and white. It's the big study that we needed, that needed to be done at a very esteemed academic institution to show that the vaccines do lead to increased chronic diseases, and they're not good for people. So that's in this issue. Then there's two books that I review in here. This one is called, and this is by Peter McCullough, John Leake, and this is an excellent book. It's got a great, if you're a history buff, one of my favorite parts is just the front part where they go through this vaccines in a chronological order, the history of them. And my favorite part's from 1986 when Congress passed the National Childhood Vaccine and Injury Act, because that's when things started to happen. That's when the vaccines really started to grow in numbers. And then it goes into the bioweapons era, which I think that our COVID-19 vaccine was a bioweapon, unfortunately, possibly used against our own people. And then the other book, so this is an outstanding book. And there's a review of this in here in the McCullough report. And there's links to that. So I always put links in to make it easier for you to find out information. You might not be interested in everything I'm interested in or think that people would be interested in, but I want to make it easy for you to get it. So there's links to everything. And then this book, Vaccine Amen, written by Aaron Siri. He's a lawyer who defends all these vaccine injury cases, and he's just a brilliant guy. But the two things that I would do here is, if you don't have a ton of time, read the introduction, go right to the study. This is the breakdown of the study of the Henry Ford hospital health system study, and it's just outstanding. It's simple, it's straightforward, and then his conclusion. So these are linked in there, and there's an interview with Peter McCullough interviewing Dr. Siri in this issue. The links are in here. So then I also got a little crazy, and then I started to think, how many vaccines were there when I was born in 1957? And then I compared them to my daughter, because at the very beginning there was a review by Dr. McCullough and his group, and it turns out the United States, gives the most amount of doses, and then they're ranked, and then Canada's next, and France and Germany, and United Kingdom and Australia, and Sweden and Norway, and then Japan. They go down in descending order in doses. And what's interesting is when people say a dose, it's kind of confusing, because a dose can be a combination of 2 or 3 vaccines put together. So, for example, if we say right now the United States gives 30 to 32 doses of vaccines in their schedule, well, that might be somewhere between 70 and 90 antigens. That means the infectious agents, or the dead viruses, or the inactivated viruses, or the compounds that are in there to trigger the immune response. So it's a lot more than that. When it used to be in my era, when I was born, we just had the DPT. You'd get that either 4 or 5 times. So you have 3 things there. 3 times 4 is 12 or 15, and then you'd add an oral polio each year. So you might have 18 or 19. And the same, my daughter was born in 1983, and there was actually the MMR was added, so that was 3 additional ones, but it still wasn't a huge amount. until 1986. And when 1986 came, and there was the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, which took away the liability of the manufacturers of vaccines, it took away their liability. Then we started to have vaccines every year increase, and in fact, I have them listed in here. They're all listed, but in 2025, I mean, for example, whereas I said in 1957, or even my daughter's year in 1983, there was the DPT, diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus. There was or the polio, and then there was MMR. That's in 1983. Now you go down the list: chickenpox, COVID-19, dengue fever, DPT, Haemophilus influenza, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, possibly Haemophilus, and uh, excuse me, the HPV, human papillomavirus, influenza, and then measles, mumps, and rubella, then meningococcal disease, pneumococcal disease, polio, respiratory syncytial virus, um, rotavirus. Those are all potential on the schedule now for someone between 0 and 18 years of age. So in this article, one of the things that is concerned is, autism pops up. Is it the load? And in here we review the McCullough Foundation report on determinants of autism, which may have flipped the switch or helped flip the switch. And the reason I'm trying to put all these together is because things are starting to change. For example, President Trump, looks, says, hey, we got to review why we have so many vaccines. And we've got RFK there who's been a proponent, but it's hard to get the systems to change because so many people in the government are from the past, so to speak. And so these things are slowly changing, but there's a momentum that's occurring. So the McCullough Foundation's report on determinants of autism was this 300 study report. It was huge. And it happened just before on the CDC website, they flipped from saying there was a statement there saying vaccines do not cause autism to there is not enough data to say that vaccines don't cause autism, and they were going to investigate. And that's a huge but subtle thing. It happened in the middle of, I think, in the middle of the night or something like that. And so I have the quotes in there from that. So you see this momentum of change starting to happen, and it's happened. Getting back to my original topic, if we didn't have the challenge to the old dogma that COVID brought on, that pulled these brilliant minds together, these brilliant physicians and researchers together to say, we want to, we want to treat COVID, and then leading on to the vaccine toxicity of the vaccine, the COVID vaccine, and that's made everybody question all vaccines. And the last point I'd like to make, and there's so much more that I'm getting into here because I don't want to go too long because I don't say it as articulately as it's written. Del Bigtree agency, but he helped produce the doctors, whatever TV production that was on, and he did the documentary Vax, which is a very uh, great documentary on vaccine harm, potential injury, and he has been a proponent of just trying to bring out the data. And he's the one that, along with Dr. Asiri, they got the they talked to Dr. Zerbos at the Henry Ford Health Systems to get that study going. And even though he said he would produce it, publish it, even if it was said vaccines um, were harmful, he changed his mind. But Dell has continued. This is probably his life's work, and so I want to finish with one of the things I want you to look at. There's a link in there where there's a 29-minute, and I couldn't find it on any other place but X. So hopefully you have X, but I linked it there, and he goes through the cost of vaccine injury, and it's mind-boggling, the cost. So I might get my years wrong, but in about 2007 or 10, the government was going to start paying or was paying out for these vaccine injured uh, individuals that or for autism. that was caused by vaccines, and there was like $5 million per each case, and there were some 5,000 cases. So if you multiply 5,000 cases by $5 million, you get $25 billion. And that would be just for autism. And so, because of the Vaccine Compensation Act that came from in 1986, the government's supposed to pay those out. And it starts to realize how much money that is. And that was back in 2007, 2010, that era. And so they took 6 cases and they called it the omnibus. I forget the exact term, but there was going to be a case of they were going to take these 6 cases, and if any one of these cases showed that vaccine harmed, then they would have to pay everybody. So the way Dell presents this is there's got to be some kind of scheme that these vaccine injured people it can't be related to the vaccine. There just has to be some way. So the first case was thrown out, and the second case was Hannah Poling, and she was a young child who got vaccine injured, but her dad was a neurologist, and he was a non-believer in vaccines causing harm and causing autism, but he watched the whole thing happen. And it just so happened that a Dr. Andrew Zimmerman was at their same institution, who's the world's expert or one of the world's experts on vaccines, and says, vaccines don't cause autism. And anyway, they get together and start talking, and uh, Dr. John Poling tries to convince him there's something. I watched this happen. This really happened to my daughter. So Dr. Zimmerman takes an interest and he discovers that she has a mitochondrial defect. And it may be that when you get this huge vaccine load and the mitochondria aren't working well, there's excess inflammation, and this causes an encephalopathy, swelling of the brain, and it could cause autism. So Dr. Zimmerman flipped. He said, this is possible. So anyway, when the government lawyers were getting together, the legal team, Dr. Zimmerman came up and said, hey, listen, I think this case, the vaccine, you know, does can cause autism in this if you have this mitochondrial defect. Anyway, the long and short of it is, and he explains it much better in the documentary, in the video, Dell does, but they said we don't want you to be the expert witness anymore. And so they end up paying Hannah Poling's family $20 million plus, but they had to make sure this other queue of five or six cases, they had to throw them out because they couldn't afford to pay for the whole system. The point I'm trying to make is that when you start adding up this money, and Dell goes into this, that's just for vaccine injury, and that was back then for just autism. And when you extrapolate forward, and he does, how many cases, like 1 out of 19 people in California, children in California develop autism, it gets into the trillions and billions of dollars when he does this estimate. He does this very unique presentation, let me put it this way, on the video. We owe $37 trillion right now in our national debt, and if we added another $20 trillion, I mean, so in other words, it's too much for any government to pay. And so that's what Dell leaves you with, this question. And I highly recommend that you watch that link to that video. You'll see the link there, and it goes to X. But it's so powerful. You just sit there, and maybe the reason, I mean, it's always about money and power, but it's always about money. But that could bankrupt the whole government if we paid back and proved that these were all vaccine injuries, which my guess is they probably are. So I'll leave you with that. I hope you take the time to go through the Substack. It's a lot. It's a lot. But there were so many things that dealt with vaccines in this 2-month period that it just came together, and I tried to put it out there as best I can. But I always have links to everything, so it's very easy to go and find the original sources, the way I do things. And if you don't like the topic, then you just skip it. So my name is Kirk Hamilton. This is a Staying Healthy Today show. I hope you got something from this, and I hope you take the time to go through the links. And actually, these two books, again, I push them again today. These are excellent books on, if anybody's really, really interested in vaccines, that's a great place to start, not too labor intensive. Okay. I'll talk to you soon. You have a really great day.